talked a lot about kind of what arrays are fundamentally, how do we use it, how do we access it, how do we access the elements, how do we change the elements, and we wrapped up by talking about a lot of the kind of common methods are built in with arrays, right? So things like push, shift, unshift, pop, not unpush, pop, etc. Right? So we have like a bunch of these methods that come pre-built in with JavaScript that are kind of meant to be used with arrays because the ECMA folks who design JavaScript said, hey, people do this with lists a lot. Let's just make it really easy for them to do it, right? It kind of comes out of box. And so today we're going to talk a lot more, or we're going to talk about some more methods that are maybe a little bit more complex, but definitely still very common ones that people use with arrays. And then we'll do a little bit of kind of a side foray into the idea of nested arrays too. Okay, so yesterday I think near the end of class someone asked a question around, okay, so we know how to add and take away things from the beginning and the end of the arrays, but what happens if I wanted to kind of go right in the middle, right? I want to take out some things in the middle, or I want to add some things into the middle of the array. How do I do that? And your answer is this .splice method. Splice and slice. They both do somewhat similar things, and they're off by one letter, so people get them confused very easily. I do too. And almost always, before I use like splice, I always go to the docs just so I can like refresh myself on like kind of what the arguments are. Splice is something that changes the original array, right? So it's very much like .reverse that we saw yesterday, right? Or .push or .pop. These are things that will change the underlying original array, as opposed to something like .slice, which gives you back a brand new array, a copy of the array that you can kind of do whatever you want with, and it won't affect the original. Okay, so .splice. One of the things that you'll notice if you ever do look at the docs for a lot of these methods I've been showing you, like .splice or .slice, etc., you'll notice that the documentation will say, hey, this argument or this function can take several arguments, more than just the 2 or 3 we talk about. And this is true, right? Especially for something like splice. Splice can take a lot of arguments. And so what we call those are called optional arguments. They're things that if you want to use some additional functionalities with slice or with splice, feel free to use them. For the purposes of this class, we're just going to cover kind of the more basic use cases, which that we don't go through like, oh, here are 4 arguments, here's what all 4 of them does. Instead, we'll just go through the most common ones. But if you do see it in the wild and you're wondering why, that's also a really good chance to refer to the docs as to kind of why they are, right? We just didn't want to build library too much with, probably some more edge use cases of certain methods. Okay, so .splice here. .splice takes in this case, we say 2 arguments. The first argument is going to be an index, right? So where we start. And the second thing is a number of elements to remove, starting at this first index. So in this case, when we do names.splice, we will say we start at index 1 and we take away one thing. So if we look at this names array here, if we start at index 1, it's John. We take away one thing, we take away John, right? So the resulting array is just going to be George and Thomas. Now, the other thing to keep in mind of is, hey, there's what splice does to the original array. Now, what do we return, right? Remember how we used .push yesterday? It added something new to the end of the original array, but it gave you back the new length. In this case, what it does is it actually gives you back an array of all the things that it just removed. So it's kind of like an extension of .pop. You know how .pop removes something and gave it back to you? In this case, we're removing something and then giving it back to you. Except in this case, it's going to be more than one thing. If you want, feel free to use this as a substitute for .pop, right, or .shift. But this is just something that people kind of use traditionally more to modify things that are not the first or the last elements in an array. But you could definitely use this to mimic the behavior of .pop or .shift. So this is how we take away things. And the next I will talk about how to add things to the array. Everyone good so far? Okay, this is just literally another example where we take away 2 things now instead of 1. So twice the fun. And then one of the things we can also do is we can also use this to, we can also use this to add elements to into the array, right? So the way we would read this particular function call is, hey, we have this names array. Let's go to index 2, so 0, 1, 2. We're now at sheet. Let's take away one thing. So now we're left with Paul, George, and John. And let's add one thing there, Ringo. And we added at the index of where we where we've been at, right? Basically, this index says we just do everything we need to do starting here, right? So we always do the remove first, and we add. So we remove P, and then we add wrinkle. So when we look at it, you will have that. And remember, that slice is going to return back whatever we took away, right? So in this case, we return P because we took away P. Yes?
So when you're taking away 2 instead of 1, is it just taking away the next one?
Yep.
In the...
Yeah. Basically, if this was a 2, then we just take away P and John, and then add wrinkle to index 2. Like this will be the new index, whatever this is. Yeah. And then something that you might see pretty often here is we can obviously use a 0 as almost like a placeholder. Remember, I think Monday, or not Monday, the first day, we talked about how the order of the arguments are very important because JavaScript's going to say, hey, I expect these things in this order, so if you don't give it to me in this order, then it's going to kind of mess up both sides, right? So in this case, it says the first argument is going to be where index I start at. The second argument has to be the number of things I take away, right? So if I don't want to take anything away, then I have to put a 0 here just so that I know, hey, I know this is a number to take away. I don't want to take anything away, so I'm going to give you 0. Because if I jump straight to this, if this didn't exist, then the slice would think, oh, okay, you want to take away peak number of elements. And I actually don't know if it'll throw an error or if it'll convert it to like a 1, right, like a truthiness, and take away 1 thing. So you just kind of don't want to go down that path, right? So in this case, because so these are optional arguments, like you can have them or not have them. The ones on the left are non-optional. Like you have to have something there, even if it's like a null value. You need to acknowledge that the fact that you're kind of skipping it, or in this case, we're using a 0 here. So in this case, we start at index 2. We take nothing away, but we're just adding Pete and then adding Stewart into the list. So now our list grows to 6 names long, and we still return back an array of everything we've taken away, which is nothing. So we return not nothing, we return an empty array. Right? This is a slight nuance that maybe you don't quite kind of sense yet, but this is actually really, really helpful because in programming, like consistency is great. Like you love consistency, and the fact that that slice will give you back an array every single time, even if it's empty, is a great kind of consistency check for you. If it doesn't return back an empty array, or returns back a null, it actually makes the code kind of hard to write. So the fact that it returns back an array is really great. And just keep in mind that 1, it will always return back an array, and 2, is an empty array truthy or falsy? Who thinks truthy? 4. Who thinks falsy? 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, almost everyone answered. Nice. Remember, only primitives have a quote-unquote falsy. Have a falsy value, right? Arrays are non-primitive. Arrays are complex because you can change them. So all complex values are by default truthy. So an empty array is still truthy. An empty object is still truthy. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind there. Okay, another one that's really great. The join function. Join function is something that people use quite a bit. What it does is, let's say you have a list of 4 names, and you want to basically say, okay, I'm going to print this out. It looks stupid if I put it in an array form. I just want it to be like a normal string. If you just do the array.join, what it'll do is it will actually add every element to a string, and by default it will put a comma and a space in between them. So names.join basically says Paul, comma space George, comma space John, comma space Ringo. And if we look at, and this is going to return back a brand new string. Also notice, it does not change the original array. So it's a very safe function to use. If you use it and if you misuse it, don't worry, it will have no impact on the original array because inherently it's saying, hey, I'm going to take this array and I'm going to give you almost like a string presentation of it. Good so far? Yeah.
How would you add like a space in there?
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. So the next slide, great question. So by default, it does comment a space, right? But if you want to ask them something special, right? In this case, like space and space, right? Or an ampersand, or a sentence, or anything for that matter, you just pass it into the join function, and the join function will say, hey, instead of using comma space, I'm going to use whatever you gave me instead. So that's how we do. That's how we get the output above. So also an optional argument, if you will. Yeah.
Is it possible to make each, like to separate them so each word appears on the new line, just in drawing?
You would, yeah, in that case, then the separator here will be like a new line symbol. And the way to do that is through a /, and which most browsers will interpret as a new line. So the answer is yes. There's a way to do it. Yeah. Right. And then another function that people tend to use quite a bit when playing with multiple arrays is the concat function. Concat function just says, hey, let's take one array, let's concat it, and add another array to it. The order in which it concats it, is like whatever function is, or whatever array is calling it is like at the beginning, and then whatever array we pass in kind of gets shoved at the very end of the first array. So in this case, Ringo, John, Paul, George, right? Ringo and John is older, and then we're concatening younger Paul and George to it. So basically shove Paul and George to the end of the Ringo and John array. But I guess I'm kind of mischaracterizing it because we're not shoving onto the end of the original array. We're actually creating a new array, right? That just looks like it's like the old array plus a new array shoved onto it. So once again, super, super safe because it doesn't change either of the arrays that we call, that we use to concat. Yeah.
So if you had a third array, could you just put dot concat basically after concat younger? And
Yep.
just keep going.
Yep, you can do that. Remember, JavaScript evaluates from left to right. So as long as the thing before the dot can do this, it'll just keep doing it.
Okay.
So I think the last slide we're talking about how to chain together a bunch of array calls too. You just got to make sure that the previous thing returns an array. So otherwise, if it doesn't return an array, then you can't use any of these array methods. Yeah.
So you mentioned that when there is a new array, when we like duplicate it and don't work with the original one, it's more safe.
Yep.
So what would you suggest if you have a choice to work with the original one or to create a copy?
That's extremely dependent on the use case at hand. There's cases in which you want to do either one.
There's no like good practice.
No. Sometimes you want to change it for everyone, sometimes you don't. You have a question back? No? No, Andre? Then I pop up.
For the splice one, can you pass it a negative?
Yeah.
Like with the index, I know it goes from the back, right?
Yeah. I don't think you can pass a negative number to the slice. Happy to try though. So 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, and then we want to do David dot splice. We'll start at 1, -1. Yeah, looks like it doesn't work. All right, so when we do 0 and when we do -1, we get back empty arrays in both cases. So I guess nothing's being taken away. And obviously, if we do 1, then we take away one thing. So yeah, it looks like negative numbers are just kind of ignored, or at least treated as But I guess the good news is even in that case, it still serves as a placeholder for the second argument. So at least it's not like misorganizing the arguments. That's concat. Okay, so those are kind of like the main kind of array functions that what we'll cover in this class. There are obviously a lot more. If you go to MDN, all right. So the Mozilla Foundation, the same people who made Firefox, they have a really good doc on JavaScript stuff, if you go into JavaScript methods, nope, that's not what I wanted. Array prototype. Yep. So here are like kind of all of the methods that kind of come built in with arrays in JavaScript out of box. So we cover like 5 or 6, but clearly there's like a ton more. So we try to kind of for this class trying to hit the high level ones, the ones that you see most commonly, but this is by no means an exhaustive walkthrough of everything to do with arrays. And in fact, you should always look at documentation whenever possible because, as I mentioned on Monday, languages evolve, languages change, and so the documentation's usually like from someone like Mozilla, for example, like it will always be the latest, greatest, up to date. One thing, even my kind of current job that we had was when we upgraded the version of Ruby we were using, right? When we upgraded Ruby, developers try to make things as backwards compatible as possible, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And so when we did upgrade our Ruby, we actually had to rewrite a lot of our functions because they now no longer work the way that the Ruby 5 or the version of Ruby we updated to no longer work the same way as the old version of Ruby. So another kind of reason why you should look at docs is just because languages also change. All right, shoot, did I do that thing again where I got, nope, good. All right, nested arrays. So we talked about how arrays can hold, elements, right? Elements can be anything, and that includes other arrays, other objects. Really, TLDR, arrays can hold everything. Every data type you think about, it can be a function, it can be a boolean, a string, another array, whatever. We can shove them all into an array. And so in this case, we have this array called related things. How many elements are in related things? 2. There's only 2 things in related things. Each of those elements is an array, and each of those arrays happen to have 2 elements, right? So the outer array still has 2 elements, and the inner array in this case also has 2 elements. So if you try to access, for example, like the 3rd index of the outer array, you're going to get back undefined because to say, hey, there is no like 4th element or 3rd element. There's only 2 things here to start with. Yeah. So normally, if I want to access the first thing in the outer array, I use a bracket notation. I pass in the index. Pretty straightforward. Now I think we're kind of veering to what you were talking about earlier, which is this idea like, hey, JavaScript takes things from left to right, right? So as long as it keeps trying to do things, as long as it's valid, it will keep working, right? So if I look at here, related things as an array. Okay, I want to get the thing in the first index, so the second element. Okay, cool. Oh, and I want to get the 0th thing of that. Well, the big question now is, whatever this is this an array? And because if it's an array, then totally, why not take the first element of the array, right? If it's not, then you're going to probably start getting some kind of errors or some kind of like undefined or things that will show very clearly in your code. But as long as this is valid, you can actually chain this indefinitely. If we do relay things without length, it's going to be 2. One quick thing here, just note too, right? Is if I do let char equals, and I have a string of let's say 1 letter e. Well, this is a good. No, maybe this isn't the best example here, but one thing I do want to show you is just the idea that like that idea of chaining things together, like that will work infinitely as long as the code is valid, right? So a string in a lot of ways operates very much like an array. For a string, we also use the square bracket notation to access certain letters in it. So for this, if I do char 0, I get back e. Cool. And if I do char 0 that, I'm saying give me the first letter of the string that has 1 character in it, the e. So then if I do one more time, and in fact if I do it 6 more times or infinitely more times, I'm still going to get back e every time, right? Because char is going to be a string of length 1 with 1 thing. I'm saying give me that 1 thing. Okay, great. Here's a string with 1 letter. Okay, give me the first letter of that. Great. Here's a string with 1 letter. Give me the first letter of that. Infinitely on, right? And so as long as whatever happens before we get to the certain point is valid, this next thing will work. So that's why when we talk about nested arrays, this is the reason why we can kind of chain together these things. This is identical to saying something like, or rather, let me do this. this is identical to doing something like like let x equals char 0, right? And then here we do let y equals x 0, and then let z equals y 0. These are identical. So rather than having to do it on different lines, we should say, hey, well, if this is x anyway, let's just take this and put it here. Let's just take this and put it here, and just kind of make the code somewhat more streamlined. Cool. All right. So yeah, so nested arrays, right? So obviously, nested arrays. Oh, one other thing about arrays is that they can hold any data type you want, and they can hold it in they can hold as many different types as you want, right? So the first thing can be a number, the second thing can be an object, the third thing can be a function, the fourth thing can be a boolean, right? Like there's no limits on not only what it can hold, but it can hold as many different types of things as you want. So in this case, for this RSVP groups array, we have an array with 3 elements. The first and third elements are both arrays, but the middle element is a string. Perfectly fair. No qualms about it. On the other hand, let's take a look at how we would go through this, right? Go through this array now. Now, if we do our normal for loop where we have an index and we check each element, it's not quite as thorough as we want it to be anymore, right? Because what it's going to do is say, hey, the first thing is an array. Great, what's in the array? Well, normally our code, our for loop, if we do a single layer of it, it doesn't tell us what's in the array. It just says this is an array, and then it moves on and says the next thing is a string, and then the next thing is an array. And we're like, okay, great, but like knowing that it's an array doesn't really help us. I need to know what's in the array, right? And so that's where something like, so in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually going to write a function that kind of helps us see one level deeper or get one level deeper. And the way we do that is by using this method we learned about yesterday called array.isArray, right? This will pass something into it, and all we'll do is it'll give us back a boolean, true or false. True if it is an array, false if it's not an array. And so in this case, how we're going to do this is we have a for loop. We're going to go through every element in RSVP group still, right? That's what element on line 4 is. But we're going to check for each element, and we're going to check to see if it's an array. If it is an array, then guess what? We're going to loop over that array, right? This part is a part that may trip you up when you do the workshop today because there's obviously a lot more things to keep track of. My advice is obviously to use different characters, different variables for indexing. Don't use I over and over and over again because, well, one, if you use I here, then you kind of lose this value of I, right? And then 2 is it also just makes the code easier to read for everyone if they know kind of, oh, here's they use J, which means they're in the inner index. Oh, this is I, this is the outer index. So, anywho, for a given element, if it's an array, then we say, hey, let's write a for loop. Let's go through that array, right? Notice how we're using a different index variable, J. Notice how J is our condition. J is less than element.length, no longer RSVP group length, because we've already established that this is an array now. So now we need to figure out what that inner array's length is, and we go through it. We console log it out, and then so all of this between lines 5 through 9 is saying, hey, if it's an array, go through the array. If it's not an array, we're going to assume it's a string, right, or a boolean or a number. Just print it out, right? And so now we're kind of handling both scenarios, right? If it's an array, we're going to traverse through it again. If it's not an array, we're going to stop. Or rather, we're just going to print it out directly. Good? Make sense? Yeah? Confusion? No?
No, I just said the workshops clearly weren't.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on anything we see here? Anything on this page? All right. This last thing is definitely a bit of a kind of like a departure. One other use case for nested arrays is to represent a grid in JavaScript. If you think about like a grid, right? It's just X number of columns by X number of rows, right? And an array can hold X number of elements. So if we think about kind of using an array to represent a grid, well, if I know an array can hold other arrays, then couldn't the inner arrays just be rows and the outer arrays be number of those rows? And if we do that, we kind of create this pseudo array or pseudo grid-like structure with only arrays. So how does that look? Kind of like that. Obviously, one thing to note here is that kind of to illustrate this example to you, we're taking some liberties with kind of how the visual, the line spacing of this is laid out. When you print this out on a computer, it's just going to be all in one massive line. But conceptually, it's the same thing, right? We just want to kind of so we print out your stuff. It's not going to look like this, but even if it's all on one line, conceptually, everything we talk about still applies, right? So yeah, so if I have an array and each array has a row of numbers, well, here I have a pretty good 3x3 grid, right? It intuitively kind of gets it kind of symbolizes a lot of the concepts that we need, and in fact, it's actually really good because in an array everything has like a number, right? Every element has an index, has a position. Well, in a grid, every single row and every single column has like a number or a position, right? Like the 6th row, the 7th row, the 1st row. So in that way, like the indexes for an array lines up very nicely with how we think about like the x and y coordinates, if you will, of a given grid. So for this example, we're going to say that the inner arrays, so this 1, 2, 3 here, represents the rows of the grid, and then each row's index is going to be the column, right? So 1, 2, 3 this is all column 1, this is all column 2, and this is all column 3, right? This is all row 1, this is all row 2, and this is all row 3. You can nod all you want. This can get really confusing once you try using it, and so like for now, just kind of let me know if something doesn't make sense. I'm not asking you to become like super comfortable or familiar with it just yet. Like that only comes through repetition and practice. But for now, let me know if conceptually like this is like feels like it just doesn't make any sense at all. So now that we've kind of created this grid system here, if I wanted to make an array of the first if I wanted to make if I want to make an array of the first row, how do I do that? Would be grid 0. Yeah, just grid 0, right? If I want the first row, basically I want everything on line 8. Well, everything on line 8 is very nicely encapsulated in this array for me, and this array happens to be the first element for the zero's index or zero's position of grid. So grid index 0 is going to give me the first row. It's pretty simple, right? The second row is going to be grid bracket 1. Third row is going to be grid bracket 2, etc. However, if I want the first column, I need to do a little bit more of like work here, right? Because there's nothing that kind of very nicely wraps up for me because I'm basically taking something from each individual row and saying, hey, give me your first thing, give me your first thing, give me your first thing, and I should be able to kind of shove them together into a column. And so if you look at how we're making the column here on line 13, we actually start by creating an array, right? Open square bracket, square close bracket, right? And so we're making an array, and now we're just worried about kind of what things we're putting in that array. And what we're doing is we're saying, all right, go to grid, go to the first row, give me the first thing in the first row. Okay, that'll be the first in my column. The next thing's gonna be go to the grid, go to the second row, give me the first thing in that column, right? So this is gonna give me this 1 from line 8. This is gonna give me the 1 from line 9. And then this is gonna say go to the third row in the grid and give me the first thing. This will give me the 1 from line 10. I now have 3 numbers, and I'm basically putting them once again into this new array that I've created. So when I console log out that, it's going to give me back an array of 1, 1, 1. So rows, pretty easy. Columns, you probably need to do a little bit more legwork on in terms of kind of getting it to the nice spot. Are we good? Yeah, great. All right. So one thing that I'll also open up, but we don't do for the week-long class just because we don't have enough time. We usually have like a few kind of optional projects in the bootcamp prep workshops. I'll still open them up for you, but we probably won't have time in class to really go through them in depth. The one I'll open up today is like you basically do like your own Sudoku thing, which, as you can imagine, if you don't know what Sudoku is, it's pretty easy to learn. But essentially, it's like a 9 by 9 grid, right, of numbers, and the numbers have to kind of obey certain rules. So it's a really good practice for kind of arrays, and especially nested arrays, and kind of iterate through them, making sure you know how to use, how to access the different values. But definitely, like, nested arrays are important, but like, you know, like if the Sudoku problem is like super tricky, like, don't stress out too much. Like, in most of the interviews that you use, like, they might ask you to use like nested arrays, but it won't be anywhere near like that particular complexity, right? Like, there's a lot there to kind of mentally work through. So you'll see that workshop open. It's kind of optional if you want to do it. Feel free to do it. If you have any questions, like, feel free to ping me. But I won't really be covering it in class as much. So yeah, so this wraps up Arrays 2. Any questions on Arrays 1 or Arrays 2? Sounds good. Cool. All right, let's get started on the workshop then.